Welcome to Joy, Love, and Abundance, designed to lift up and explore the people, organizations, and experiences that create a more joyful, loving, and abundant world. Join hosts Rodney Eric Lopez, Patrice Tanaka, and Cyrus Webb as they share stories and insights that will inform and inspire you. Enjoy today's broadcast.
And welcome back, everyone, to Joy, Love, and Abundance, a special edition of our program. I'm Cyrus Webb, joined by my wonderful co-hosts, Patrice Tanaka and Rodney Eric Lopez. We hope you all have had a great week, depending on how you're listening to our program, either on the radio side or online. We appreciate you all being with us. Rodney and Patrice, glad to be back with you all. Unfortunately, it is not under the best of times. We once again find ourselves at a time of mourning in many ways in this country. But first of all, I want to ask you, what has this week been like for the two of you?
Well, for me, as an Asian American woman, I've been kind of on a roller coaster, and I'm surprised at how much this hits home for me. I've been so busy focused on things for the Diversity Action Alliance and for the PR Museum. We're actually organizing an Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month celebration for May. So that's kind of what I've been working on. And then this thing happens, and I'm still busy doing those other things. And then I realized Tuesday night, oh, my God, I am so sad. I'm so angry, and I'm so exhausted that this has happened. But there has been ups and downs, and actually some really great things and some really not so great things that have happened in the space between Tuesday and today, Friday, now that we're talking to one another. And yeah, I'd love to share with you what's happened over that time.
Yeah, and definitely we're going to get more into that. Patrice, Rodney, what about for you? I mean, what has this, for our radio audience and our online audience, of course they know there's a lot that's happening in the United States this year, though there have been some bright spots, of course, being announced that you now have 100 million shots of the COVID vaccine that have been now in arms. The president announcing now his next goal is 200 million. You have those high points, and then you have the low points. It kind of began this week with the trial of Derek Chauvin beginning in Minneapolis. Of course, he's the police officer accused of killing George Floyd. And then you have the horrible incident, the shooting in Atlanta that left so many dead. And so, Rodney, as I was saying, with everything that's going on, what has it been like for you, to kind of process what's been happening this week?
I keyed into one word that Patrice said a moment ago, and this word is tired, right? Yeah. Like there is a sort of an emotional exhaustion that takes place. And I think a lot of it just has to do with what feels like an assault, in one news story after another that comes at you around violence. We still have yet to, we're still processing January 6th, and we're still processing the all of the dominoes that continue to fall as a result of that. We are processing Derek Chauvin, and that trial and the conversation and the trauma that brings up for the nation. And now we have this new, just horrific act of violence. And while in a country this large, that's as large as the United States is, there are going to be acts of violence every day. There are just certain acts of violence that rise to the top of the nation's consciousness, and to see yet another act of violence committed against people of color in this particular instance, Asian women who in the explanations that are given around why that is, which are clearly so inadequate, to it. it just continues to add, exhaustion on top of exhaustion, insult to injury. And I think that I know we're going to get into, maybe the other sides of these, what other good things might come out of situations like this later in the conversation. But in terms of this week, it feels like yet another emotional assault. And so, I just want to name, that the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, just has allies. There are so many people who are lifting you up and holding you at this time, and so it's a hard season right now in our country. It's a hard season.
It is, and I tell you for myself, the week started off. I'm a person. My family says I'm kind of a person with not a lot of affect, and if there's bad news to be given, I'm the one that's appointed in the family to give it, because I'm able to normally hold myself together to be able to deliver it. I can remember being 11 years old and having to tell my great-grandmother that my grandmother tell my grandmother that my great-grandmother had died. And because no one else was up to doing it. I started off this week because outside of hosting, of course, this show with you guys and hosting Conversations Live, I'm also the news director for WYED in Mississippi. And so I started off the week reporting on the Derek Chauvin trial, of course, the jury being selected for that, and, of course, the protests that were happening with that. And then Tuesday night, I was in Bible class when my phone went off with an alert about the shooting in Atlanta. And at the time, I did not know the details about it. It wasn't until Wednesday morning when I was able to read the details. But what I thought about, too, and when we kind of talked about what this show would be about, I think there's so many people that can really go along with what you're both saying. I think they are just emotionally tired. I think in many ways it affects you physically. I mean, there's just so much happening at once. And for me, I always think about, okay, what can we do? And I love what you said, Patrice, about how we can help others. Now, of course, I think, regardless of where our audience may live, I think we all know what it's like to feel at some point, either less than or discriminated against or mistreated. Patrice, I want to ask you, though, is one of the bright spots of this past week the fact that there is more attention on what's been happening over the past year, something I wasn't as aware of, and that is how especially the Asian community has been targeted, since the pandemic started, and that's been getting more of a spotlight. Has that been one of the bright spots of this year, the raising of awareness of that discrimination toward that community in the United States?
Yes, and I thank you for hitting it on the head, because so much of this anti-Asian hate has been invisible for a long time. I mean, this has been going on for a long, long time. And yet this past year, because of COVID and because of President Trump, who kept characterizing it as the China virus or Kung Flu, that really put more of the spotlight and scapegoating on the Asian American community. And the problem for a lot of white Americans who might go after the Asian community or Chinese, who they think are responsible for the virus, is that anyone who looks Asian is a target, right? So what happened Tuesday was really kind of the culmination of a full year of a rise in racist incidents that have been reported to StopAAPIHate.org. They're a coalition of organizations focused on documenting and addressing anti-Asian hate and discrimination. So there's been 3,800 reported incidences over the past year. And then Tuesday, with the shooting of 8 women, actually 6 of them Asian American and 2 of them white, that has been a lot of and the media see this as a hate crime directed to Asian Americans. Now, the shooter himself said, you know, he had a sexual addiction, and the police captain who was trying to explain the shooter's state of mind and why he actually shot and killed 8 women was because he had a very bad day. Well, I mean, that really kind of set off a firestorm, because a very bad day ending up in 8 people dead, 6 of them Asian American women, reeks of racism and misogyny. Forget about mental illness and gun violence and other things. But I've seen social media posts from people questioning, well, how do we know it's an, anti-Asian hate crime? He had a sexual addiction. He just, shot women who were working at a spa, or I'm not quite sure what those places are called. And we can't characterize it as a Asian hate crime. Well, everyone that I know, Asian, white, black, are very clear that this is a hate crime, and it is an Asian American hate crime. And part of what I am, I'm of course devastated by this, but I am also kind of surprised and excited that there are so many more Asian Americans speaking up and protesting, and also our allies from the black community and the brown community also supporting us and standing with us. And part of the problem for Asian Americans for so long is that we've always been stoic about not complaining or reporting hate crimes. And so, because if you don't report it and if no one knows that this happened to you, it's almost as if it didn't happen. And we can no longer be silent and be invisible and have these hate crimes against Asian Americans be invisible. So that's one of the good things that have emerged for me. And all of these, shows and expressions of support on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, of course on all of these platforms, and an outpouring of support standing with, our Asian American brothers and sisters. So that has been very gratifying. And a lot of people, black, white, and Asian, have reached out to me since Tuesday just to see if I'm okay and is there anything I can do. I mean, so that has been surprising, but also very comforting. So,
yeah. Rodney, I'm going to bring you back in here. I want to say, though, for those who are just tuning in on the radio side or listen to the podcast, you're listening to Joy, Love, and Abundance. I'm Cyrus Webb. You just heard there from Patrice Tanaka. Also, we have Rodney Eric Lopez with us. We're talking about this is a special edition of our broadcast, both for the radio side as well as online. We're talking about, of course, of the past week, including, of course, the horrible shooting in Atlanta, but also, of course, the idea of racism and hate and bigotry that has now been brought to the forefront again this week, even in the black community with the trial of Derek Chauvin, who was on trial for the death of George Floyd. You said something, Rodney, before we went on here that I think is so important for our audience, because these things are very heavy topics that we're discussing. They are not always the easiest to talk through, but you said something basically along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, you can definitely speak for yourself, about it's okay not to be okay. Talk to us about that, not only for yourself, Rodney, but what you want our audience to know about that with everything that's happening in the world, even things in their own personal lives, why it's okay to admit you're not okay.
I think it's so important, Cyrus. This is a show whose theme is joy, love, and abundance. And I think that, if anybody's been listening to us for more than one episode, they've learned that, not only are we looking for examples of expressions of joy, love, and abundance in the stories that we choose on a weekly basis, but that we also speak very, very passionately about finding joy and love and abundance, even in the midst of trying times or challenging times. And I think that as a rule, that's a good way to live. That's an important way to live. It's important to be in a state of gratitude. It's important to be in a state of appreciation. It's important to be focused on the positive and not the negative more often than not in our lives. But there are just times when it's okay to be angry. There are just times when it's okay to be indignant. There are times when it's okay to grieve. There are times when it's okay to be mad as hell and not take it anymore. And I think that, situations like this where we are confronted with, not just violence, but violence that is based in a racism that has been present since the country's founding. People of color, Black, brown, Asian, indigenous people especially, have been subject to physical, social, emotional, spiritual, and financial violence since the founding of the United States, and that has to be named. It's been by that's happened by the hands of the dominant culture, and so when these things happen, it's like reopening a wound. The wound can never heal when it continues to get ripped open again and again and again. And so I think there are moments when you can't quickly just turn on the joy button or turn on the love button or turn on the abundance button. There's a time for grieving. There's a time for anger. There's a time for indignation. And there's a time for everything under the sun, as the scripture says, right? There's a season for everything. And right now, many of us may need to be in a season of upset over this. And that doesn't mean that it's going to last forever. And it doesn't mean that we can't work through that upset and that anger to a place of healing and to a place of joy or love. But I just want anybody who's listening to this to know that if you're not feeling particularly joyful right now, if you're not feeling particularly loving right now or abundant right now, it's okay to be in that space and to be completely present to the feelings of not joyful and not loving and not abundant. I think what the three of us would say is it's not healthy to stay there. It's healthy to find outlets for your anger that convert anger into action, and convert anger into metabolizing something that then turns what's a tragedy into something life-giving for someone else. And I think that's what Patrice was saying a moment ago, that even in the midst of this tragedy, that there is an outpouring of support, and that's beautiful. And we want more of that, and hopefully action, and hopefully legislation, and hopefully reform. And it's okay if it takes you a while to get there.
And can I add one thing to this? Because I think if you have a friend who is Asian American, you should reach out to that person, because some of my friends did not reach out to me because they just, they know me in a certain way. They're not thinking that I personally would relate to the women who got shot in Atlanta. But I do hurt because they are members of the Asian American community, and they're women. And crimes, anti-Asian hate crimes against women in particular are 2.3 times higher than all Asian Americans. So, there is kind of a focus on what I think people think are more vulnerable people in the Asian American population, older people. That's why you see a lot of attacks happening on 80-year-olds, and then women. So I think it would really be much appreciated if you reached out to someone or all of the Asian American people that you know who are near and dear to you, and even those who aren't, because it will be appreciated. Because if you don't reach out to someone who is Asian American, and I went through this, so I know, it's part of me is wondering, do they even know that this happened in Atlanta? Do they even understand that I feel that it is an attack on the Asian American community and Asian American women in particular? Or do they just see it as, oh, yeah, another, horrible shooting in America, and, oh, yeah, it's Atlanta. You know what I mean? So they're not even focused on my community and the hate that is focused right now on my community. So it would be lovely for them to, reach out to you so you know that they are thinking of you and they do understand and get that, the rising incidence of hate crimes against Asian Americans. So,
but Patrice, I didn't want to interrupt you, but there's something you just said, though, that it's interesting that you said it, and I think we're going to have to address this in another show for sure, because I had one of my friends who is Asian American who actually went on social media and says, you don't need to text me. You don't need to reach out to me. I'm okay. I need my space. So I... And she's an actress. I know her because she was on How to Get Away with Murder and Dynasty. And she literally went on a Instagram Live and says, please, I need my space. You don't have to text me. I'm good. Don't message me right now. I just need some time to process. So I think it's an individual thing. I totally get what you're saying, though, and how you felt. And I don't want to in any way discount that. But I do want our audience to know not everyone may share that feeling.
Yes.
I think
an actress and a celebrity too. So that's a different category. I mean, they, probably get too many people bothering them all the time. But I'd rather err on the side of showing something that you really have been thinking about them and that you care about them, and you're connecting what happened to Atlanta to Asian American hate crimes and their concern for you. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I
think that. No, I was just going to say I agree. I think it's true. Everybody responds to things differently. Some people welcome in any tragedy, right? Under any circumstances, right? Even it could be, the loss of a loved one or what have you. I mean, some people welcome expressions of support and condolence and other things, and other people retreat and need space. But I think I agree with Patrice. It's always better to err on the side of compassion and communication, and then let someone tell you, I appreciate that, but I'm good for right now, and I think that it's always better to err on that, I think, than in retreating. But it speaks to relationship, right? I think what I took from what Patrice just said a moment ago is just this idea of relationship, and are we connected to the people in our lives? We can't call everybody every day, obviously, but these are moments when it can be good, right, to reach out to folks and check in and see how they're doing.
Yeah, really good point. I want to say before we close here a couple things, because Patrice, I think I want you definitely to give out that website again. But I want to say at the time that we are having this taping today, and this conversation is taped for our radio audience, you all are going to hear it a couple of times at WYAD 94.1 FM and WYADonline.com a couple of times this week. And for our podcast audience, I want to let you guys know at the time that we are taping, they have now identified all 8 of the people killed in the Atlanta area spot shooting. That was one of the things that they were holding off on Thursday on March the 18th, but they have now identified all 8 people. So we definitely want to invite you guys to go to usatoday.com. They've given an update on that. Another great thing I wanted to mention, guys, and then we'll go around. There is, Patrice, you mentioned the good things. Another thing that Forbes is now reporting, it literally just happened as we were coming on the air here, that over $1 million has been raised by GoFundMe for one of the Atlanta shooting victims' family in 16 hours. The 51-year-old, that was one of the 8 that was killed during the shooting spree. They have now raised over $1 million through GoFundMe, and they're now working to do so for others as well. Forbes.com is reporting that as of right now, $1.4 million has been raised from 35,000 donors. Again, it shows the goodwill that is going out to the families that, of course, had victims of this horrible massacre. And Patrice, do you want to reshare the information that you shared about where people can go for more information too?
Yes, there's a great website. It's actually a coalition of different organizations, and the URL is stopaapihate.org. Stop AAPI hate. AAPI stands for Asian American and Pacific Islanders. So stopaapihate.org. If you want to report a crime, and you can report it in any language, any Asian language, and they capture that information and they offer help. And also you can support their great work by making a donation.
Great. Well, Patrice, Rodney, not the type of show that we typically do, but I think definitely important for our audience because, Rodney, I think you summed it up really well in our pre-show that there are going to be those times that every day is not going to be a good day, that everyone's not going to be feeling their best for whatever might be the reason. But I think being able to recognize that, to acknowledge it and give space for it is so important. But also know that, as Patrice mentioned, Patrice, I love the point you made, that there are still good things that are happening. Even in the face of evil, there are still good things that are happening, and I hope our audience will keep reaching toward those good things. Rodney, Patrice, thank you so much for another great show, and for your audience, may you, even through the darkest times, look for a way to be able to find some joy, love, and abundance, even if it takes a while. Know that we'll be back here next week. Until then, you all make it a great one. Take care.